pleasure to open the substantive part of our discussion. And I'd like to do that by giving you some thoughts on why I think health reform is so difficult. I've been around the block on health reform for many years now. I've worked for Hillary on the ill-fated, what I call the greatest socio-political disaster of modern American times, 1993-94. I chronicled the Schwarzenegger effort a couple of years ago and wrote a monograph on that. And that's free, so if anyone wants the study on why California failed, I can send it to Tony and you can send it around to folks. And now, of course, I'm watching this one with intense interest and growing optimism, I should say, because I think we will get something. What it is unclear. It'll satisfy nobody, but that's the process. And I'm beginning to think something substantial and positive is going to happen. I put up some numbers to start my discussion here. You can all take a quick look at it. It's kind of like an icebreaker. We don't have the time to ask you if you know what all of them are, but you might look and see if any of those numbers seem relevant to you in terms of the healthcare reform debate today. And then the next slide will show us what they are. If you're peeking ahead, you're cheating. The 2022 is the year since we wrote our Constitution and created a stalemated system of politics in which nothing big happens easily. Everything in America happens slowly and incrementally, so we still have that system. 60 is the number most of you probably got if you thought about it a lot, which is the number of votes needed in the U.S. Senate to pass health reform. If it were 51 votes, we'd be looking at a totally different scenario. Everybody would know this was going to happen. Everybody would have known from day one this was going to happen. And everybody would have been thinking not how do I defeat this, but how do I get the worst thing I don't like out and the most important thing in. And it's a much easier political scenario than when you have a sizable number of people thinking we actually may be able to defeat this. The $170 million is the amount of money the health industry gave in campaign contributions to congressional candidates in 07, 08, so they have some clout, we presume. The 1.5 million there is the money given to Senator Baucus of the Senate Finance Committee. And incidentally, lest you think congressional members need this money, it's instructive to remember that Baucus won just last year by 73% of the vote, and probably couldn't lose no matter what he did looking forward. So why he needs money is another story. The 1.4 million is the amount spent by the health-related industries lobbying in 2009 per day. 12 million is the amount our host, Farmer, spent lobbying January to June of 2010. The most, the organization that spends more money on lobbying than any other in the United States. The several $1 trillion is what Obama spent to date on various different things, which, or is committed to spend on various different things, which obviously makes another $1 trillion that much harder. And the 400% income, 400% is the income level that we now probably have to subsidize people to in terms of buying insurance. It shows you how many people are going to have to be subsidized in order to pass this and get universal coverage in America. And I'll show you why later why that number has changed so much. So I'd like to give you some of my ideas as to why this is so difficult. Not including, obviously, the huge, what you might call value gap between us and every other industrialized country that has achieved universal coverage. Let's leave that aside. Let's just look at the kind of technical realities of it. The first suggestion I'd make is what a friend of mine recently at a reform conference said: health reform is rocket science, because it is incredibly difficult. And what happens in health reform is the pieces are all so interrelated, and you have 50% of the money coming from the public side, 50% coming from the private side. There's almost nothing on the healthcare checkerboard that you can move that doesn't move something else. So everybody says keep it simple, but you can't keep it simple. By definition, it expands, it becomes comprehensive, it brings in more players, and as you bring in more players, you bring in more enemies, and you bring in that 220 years of a system created to generate stalemate rather than forward movement. I often think about it like the idea of redistricting or reapportionment. in which every 10 years, we're coming up to that time, we have to move all the congressional districts around so that we keep the same number of people in every district. So if a politician in San Diego decides, I need a few more Democrats in my district, and wants to get a few blocks just to the north to get a few more districts, before you know it, you're moving Sacramento to equal the districts. So a little bit that's what happens in health reform. The most obvious example is the relationship between all the things we want to do to the insurance companies. No pre-existing conditions, you can't treat people differently, you gotta rate everybody the same. And the insurance companies come back fairly and say, okay, so long as everybody has to have insurance. So the nice little thing of let's just fix the insurance rules quickly expands into a good thing, universal coverage. Because you really can't let people go in and out and tell the insurance companies you can't charge some people more or less. The second problem, and I think it's even bigger, is you can't have health reform without cost control. Everybody understands this now. Obama clearly understands this. The equal reality is you can't get health reform with cost control. Because every time you talk about cost control or limiting cost growth, people think less choice, less access, less quality, rationing, and all the opponents get all these weaponry, which is why the current proposal doesn't have a lot of teeth in it when it comes to health reform, and why perhaps when President Obama, in his State of the Union or his healthcare speech last week, said, I'm going to cut waste and fraud, and everybody laughed. Well, they deserve to laugh in a way. It's all you can say about what you're going to do about saving money in the healthcare system without getting worse than laughs. So my own feeling is you got to put the money up front, you have to do it, worry about the costs later. If you put too much cost control, real teeth into cost control, into anything right now, it's dead. So the next point is that reform needs to reduce costs, but the easiest way to get success is to increase spending. This is true of probably any public policy area you can imagine. The doctors want something, the nurses want something, the hospitals want something, the drug companies want something, or they don't want something, right? And all those things involve money. And the way to build a winning coalition is to give those people what they need, or enough of them what they need, and every one of those things is money. Most analysts of this problem remind us that reducing costs means changing the delivery system. The simple fixes like we apply some rate regulation, we're gonna pay the doctors less. Those things are short-term kinds of fixes. Most people recognize if we're gonna really change the system, really reduce costs, we have to change the delivery system, and everybody knows that's the hardest thing to do. So it's not in there, and probably not going to be there. And maybe we should remember that we got Medicare in 1965 because Johnson gave the doctors everything they wanted, knowing that that was unsustainable and he was going to have to take it back, or some president was going to have to take it back later. That may be the only way to get from here to there, although Johnson, of course, didn't have CBO telling him how much Medicare was going to cost and that he wasn't paying for it. Had he had CBO, he might not have been able to pass that either. Comprehensive reform takes time, but we don't have time. Not just we have to fix the problem quickly, but everybody's saying if this doesn't get done this year, the forces of electoral politics come in, everybody gets worried. So yes, maybe this should take 2 years, we don't have 2 years. And reform may need to happen in the middle. Obama's in the middle. But on his left, he has all the energy of the Democrats wanting single payer. And on the right, he has all the Republicans wanting market-based system. He's probably in the only place where this thing can pass. But there's no energy there. The energy is on his left and his right. Other problems is the public wants change in the system, but not maybe in their own personal circumstances. We saw the testimonials of those who have nothing. But ask most people, do you like your insurance company? It's okay. It's a lot like they say about politicians. I hate Congress, but my congressperson's pretty good. When you get right down to it, most people are content, and those are the people who have more money, more power, those are the middle and upper middle classes, they're content. It's hard to push them into something, which is why, of course, Obama and Hillary before him said, I promise you this, nothing's gonna change if you like what you have. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but that's the promise you have to make to middle and upper middle income Americans.